Let's face it, Generation Y got screwed. They were being set up for failure. I can speak to this firsthand, and it's really depressing when I look around and see the people my age, and they just don't have an identity because they grew up in the most rapidly changing, erratic, and unpredictable decade in American history, the 90s. Growing up in the astral plane before the internet and after the internet. And the 90s was that ephemeral period between Gen Xers and the prototypical millennials. We were basically the guinea pigs of the internet. So I remember when I was in junior high, they were telling us to get into computers because computers were the future. So fair enough. I like computers, sure. But by the time I got to high school, they were singing a different tune. Now they were saying there were too many computer programmers. So the prevailing wisdom shifted to, do not go into computers because it's oversaturated. And they were right, until I graduated college. Moral of the story, this generation endured some pretty poor advice when it came to any long-term projections of the job market. So of course, they were also harping about the shortage of teachers and police officers. So naturally, kids were like, fine then, we'll go into teaching and policing. Cut to college graduation, and teachers are getting laid off, there's a hiring freeze on police. I mean, it was a disastrous generation for receiving vocational advice, or any kind of advice for that matter. We were being taught the food pyramid, which we now know should have been inverted. Marijuana was bad for you. Milk was good for you. Pluto was still a planet. Brontosaurus was real. How many blasted lies can one generation handle? The sheer level of misinformation being disseminated by supposedly trusted grown-ups and authority figures was nothing short of staggering and absurd and tragic. And granted, they meant well. They were just utterly clueless. This was also the generation long before social media turned into a trillion-dollar empire. So instead, we were taught to behave and be quiet and listen to your elders and conform and just go to college and you will find a pot of gold at the end of the proverbial rainbow. But alas, we had to find out the hard way that a liberal arts degree is more like a lump of coal when it comes to bartering for career opportunities. Unless you want to become a data analyst, which isn't much of a career. And then finally, being meek and modest and soft-spoken, characteristics we were raised to believe would get us ahead in life, went out of fashion. You need to be loud and proud now. You need to be bold and shameless and seek attention if you want to survive in the age of creating your own propaganda. You need to monetize your hobby, whether it's art, music, video games, traveling. Nobody can tell you these things aren't viable, like we were told in the 90s. But life is a cliche, because if only we knew then what we know now. Because you can't do a mulligan on your identity well into your middle age. Because you no longer have the benefit of youth on your side. Because your mistakes aren't dismissed as growing pains. Because your ignorance is not adorable anymore. There are actual consequences for your actions. Because society has deemed you obsolete. The same society that betrayed you with the worst advice. Or maybe the best advice. Do not listen to society. So, yeah, here's a toast to Gen Y, or whatever you want to call this generation, because it seems to get pigeonholed with the entire millennial generation. How about Gen Zero? Because it might as well be the non-existent generation.